Thank you, Roman. That was very impressive, very interesting, and I think very insightful. Thank you to Partnership for Change for organizing such an impressive conference. I'm proud to be part of this. I've worked on constitutional reform in many countries over the past decade or so, and I've worked in Ukraine. Last year I was there twice, helping to implement a new criminal procedure code, which was a very advanced criminal procedure code, and also trying to resurrect constitutional reform, which has been brewing in Ukraine for a long period of time, although it's not necessarily clear who really wanted constitutional reform to take place. So I tried on several visits in 2013 to resurrect constitutional reform in Ukraine. My work was primarily on affecting the judiciary, which of course is an important pillar of the rule of law, something that is drastically needed now. Ukraine had developed a constitutional assembly for the purposes of constitutional reform, but the group never really got on track. There were working groups in a lot of different areas. They either did not work, or when they did work, they did not agree. There was a set of reforms that we were working with. It met many of the objectives of a free and fair and impartial judiciary, which really hasn't been the case in recent years in Ukraine. It was largely approved, although not entirely, by the Venice Commission, which of course initiates much constitutional reform in Europe and other places in the world. Unfortunately, many of the reforms came from the presidential administration. There was still work that needed to be done, but in my opinion, it was a good start and at least raised many issues for discussion. I met with probably each of the primary opposition political parties, leaders, and interest groups. We focused on the issues, looked for acceptable alternatives to what had been proposed. Again, my primary objective was a much more independent, fair, and impartial judiciary. But I will tell you that there was nearly 100% opposition to any change. There was a lot of agreement on the principles. The political parties are not far apart on principles, on issues of law. But there was just an abject refusal to participate. There's no trust. Trust had completely fallen apart. And although I think we made some progress, we really could not have advanced the ball any farther toward the goal. What really mattered to many of the opposition parties was only who had proposed the changes. And you can sense there that the breakdown in the political system was becoming intractable. And in retrospect, one could clearly see a train wreck coming. It only needed the spark, and the spark, of course, was provided in November by the refusal to sign the European Integration Agreement. Division and distrust in the political system had gone way too far by 2013 to resurrect, at least under current conditions. You know, I worked a lot last year with judges, with prosecutors, and with legal professionals. All of that work went very, very well. There was no sign of tension, no sign of distrust, just many people who were very proud of their country, and I was in all parts of Ukraine. But the political system is what is deeply broken in Ukraine. The opposition parties clearly were anti-Yanukovych, but they, as far as I could tell, were not pro-anything. And when the antis take over, a country becomes ungovernable and vulnerable to crisis. So what to do about the situation? I don't have the diplomatic solution. Maybe Mr. Hansen will advise us on that and give us his thoughts on that. That's not my expertise. But I do think that although there are elections scheduled next week, that might be too soon. I'm not sure that the situation has settled down enough for political elections to take place. I would much prefer to see a caretaker government with financial support to get the country back on its feet again. And at some point, in my view, the solution has to be broad constitutional reform. A constitutional assembly that really focuses on a united Ukraine. To make this happen, there of course has to be an incentive, and I think keeping a country together in one piece is enough incentive for anybody to work on these issues. And it's a process of rebuilding trust, which will really be only one step at a time. I agree with Roman, this is going to take some time. A large assembly is probably unavoidable, but I would utilize a small working group that is outside of the partisan influences that are still inflaming Ukraine today. I would utilize outside experts and mediators, work with the Venice Commission, which is a very professional body. I would utilize former leaders who have an interest in their country's future, in legal professionals who really understand what the rule of law is all about, and young, bright minds, people who can look out to a country's future and see a place for them and a place for their countrymen. Although I don't have time to go through many of the principles of the Shared Societies project that the Club of Madrid has promoted, they are very good principles. They can be applied, all of them really, to the situation in Ukraine, and the country will be much better for it. They fit nicely into this building of a new foundation that can be based on trust and cooperation. And I don't know that ultimately it's that difficult a task because there aren't that many issues that need to be resolved from a foundational constitutional perspective. Human rights are largely agreed upon. We have a world consensus on human rights that must be protected in every country. This is not a matter for great debate in constitutional assemblies. The World Covenants, particularly the International Covenant on Human Rights, has a foundation. The European Court on Human Rights has a series of decisions that give us great guidance as to human rights. But the government structures part of the Ukrainian constitution really needs a focus. I'm a judge. I will focus primarily on building an independent and accountable judiciary, a judiciary that will promote the rule of law, that will protect both human rights and economic rights, because this is a country that needs investment. The current constitution is lacking in checks and balances, and I'm a firm believer in building in checks and balances to every constitution. And I do think that, at least for the time being, there needs to be a plan for power sharing. That's the only way you can get beyond this deep divide that separates East and West on the surface, but it goes much deeper than that. Single party dominance is not something that needs to be part of the discussion in Ukraine in the years to come. Strong legal protection for minorities that's built into the Constitution is essential. And, you know, Roman touched on this in his talk, but we really need to have a very strong anti-corruption commission that is advised by outside professionals who know how to prosecute people for the corruption crimes that have existed in the past. It may be not necessary to look back. It might be too inflammatory, but surely looking to the future. The country deserves a government that is not corrupt, that does not take bribes, and when they do, they're prosecuted. And of course, we need public input into the new Constitution and really need to address some of the sore points that are caused by the current structures that exist. And ultimately, I think I would use the shared society principles, and I think that while not going into them in detail, they all apply here and will be very, very helpful. We need to take the debate off the streets and into the assembly halls throughout Ukraine and really work very hard at building a new foundation from many of the stones that are present, but today lie askance because of developments over the past year. Thank you.